This delicate linen cloth is over 5,000 years old. Its survival is a mystery woven from secrets we are only now beginning to unravel. You are about to step into the hidden world of ancient Egyptian weaving, a craft that defined a civilization. By the end of this, you will understand how a simple thread connects purity, power, and the afterlife itself. We will uncover why they chose a plant few others valued, and how they spun it into fabrics so fine they were called woven air. What do you believe is the most important secret a single piece of cloth can hold? This fabric was far more than simple clothing. It was a living symbol woven into the very soul of Egypt. Priests wore it to perform sacred rituals, believing its purity created a barrier against chaotic forces. Pharaohs draped themselves in its finest weaves, a shimmering declaration of their divine right to rule. Even in death, linen was the final garment, the essential wrapping that protected a soul on its journey to the afterlife. This was not a choice of convenience. The ancient Egyptians saw linen, born from the flax plant, as ritually clean. It represented light and truth, a direct contrast to wool, which they often considered unclean. But the legacy of linen stretches far beyond temples and tombs. Its production was a colossal economic engine, one of the true cornerstones of their society. From the farmer in the field to the weaver at the loom, countless lives depended on the flax harvest. The state tightly controlled its production, storing vast quantities in royal warehouses. It was a form of currency, a measure of wealth, and a tool of diplomacy. Think of it as the oil of the ancient world, a resource so vital it could build empires. This was a material that clothed the living, honored the gods, and guided the dead. How did a single plant come to hold such immense power over an entire civilization? The key to their entire linen empire was a humble, blue-flowered plant called flax. This was not a crop grown in sprawling, open fields, but in carefully managed plots along the fertile banks of the Nile. The specific species, Linum usitatissimum, was so perfectly suited to the Egyptian environment it seemed destined for this purpose. Its name even means most useful linen, a title it earned through every stage of its life. The agricultural cycle was a race against time, meticulously planned around the Nile's annual flood. Farmers sowed the seeds in the winter after the floodwaters had receded and left behind a thick layer of rich, moist silt. This natural fertilizer gave the young flax plants an incredible start. They grew rapidly through the cool winter months, reaching for the sun. By early spring, the fields were a sea of delicate blue blossoms, a beautiful but short-lived sight. The harvest had to happen just as the plants began to turn yellow before the seeds fully matured. If they waited too long, the inner fibers would become coarse and brittle, useless for fine linen. This precise timing was everything. Workers would pull the entire plant up by the roots, not cut it, to preserve the full length of the precious fibers bundled inside the stem. Why go to all this trouble for one plant? The answer lies in the fiber itself. Inside that tough, woody stalk are long, slender strands that are incredibly strong, smooth, and flexible. When processed correctly, these strands become linen thread. This was a fiber that could be spun into a thread as fine as a human hair, yet it was stronger than wool. It was naturally cooling to wear in the blistering Egyptian heat, and its smooth surface repelled dirt and moisture. Wool, by contrast, was seen as ritually impure, partly because it came from an animal and could harbor pests. Linen, born from the earth and the divine waters of the Nile, was considered clean, a fiber of light and purity. This combination of practical perfection and spiritual significance made flax the undisputed king of fibers. From this delicate plant, they would now begin the arduous task of creating cloth fit for a god-king. But pulling the plant from the earth was only the very first step. The real challenge, a secret alchemy of water and sun, was about to begin. To unlock the precious fibers hidden deep within the flax stalk, the Egyptians employed a process called retting. They would gather the harvested plants and submerge them in shallow pools of water, often using the Nile itself as a giant natural vat. There, the bundles of flax would soak for days, sometimes even weeks. This was not a simple washing. It was a controlled decay. The stagnant water encouraged bacteria to feast on the natural gums and pectins, the sticky glues that bound the valuable fibers to the useless woody core of the stalk. The timing was absolutely critical. Leave the flax in the water for too short a time, and the fibers would remain fused, impossible to separate cleanly. Leave it for too long, and the bacteria would start to digest the fibers themselves, weakening them into a soft, rotting mush. The master retter had to judge the perfect moment by feel and smell, a skill passed down through generations. When the stalks felt slippery and the water gave off a distinct earthy odor, the process was complete. The soaked bundles were then hauled out and laid flat in the sun to dry completely, the next phase of their transformation. Once the stalks were brittle and dry, the brutal work of extraction could start. Workers would use a wooden tool to break the stiff stalks over a hard surface. With a series of sharp cracks, the woody core, now called the boon, would shatter. Then came scutching, a process of beating the broken stalks with a wooden blade to knock all the shattered wood pieces loose and away. Finally, they would pull the stalks through a set of fine, sharp pins in a process called hackling. This last combing action removed any final stray bits of wood and also aligned the long, silky fibers, separating them from the shorter, coarser toe. What remained after all this back-breaking labor was a handful of soft, lustrous, pale gold filaments from each stalk. It was a substance of astonishing potential, ready for the spinner's skilled hands. Can you picture the sheer volume of plants required to produce just 1 meter of fine cloth? Each step was a gamble against nature, a test of human endurance to win a thread of pure light. From that handful of soft flax fibers, the real magic of creation began. The ancient Egyptian spinner did not have a complex machine, only a simple tool of profound importance, the drop spindle. This device was little more than a straight wooden rod with a weighted disc called a whorl attached to the bottom. Yet in the hands of a skilled craftsperson, it became an instrument of transformation. The process was a beautiful, rhythmic dance. The spinner would draw out a few fibers from a mass of prepared flax, attaching them to a hook or notch at the top of the spindle. With a flick of the wrist, they would set the weighted spindle spinning like a top suspended in the air. As it twirled, the spinner continued to gently pull or draft more fibers from the fluffy mass. The twisting motion traveling up from the spinning spindle would catch these new fibers, locking them into a continuous, strong thread. The key was maintaining a perfect balance between the pull of the hand and the twist of the spindle, a skill that took years to master. The thickness and strength of the final thread were entirely controlled by this delicate dance. For the finest, most ethereal linen, used in garments so sheer they were described as woven air, the spinner would draft out just a few perfectly aligned fibers, creating a thread as fine as a human hair. This required incredible patience and a flawless touch. For heavier duties like the thick ropes and immense sails that powered Egyptian ships, the spinner would deliberately use more fibers and a tighter twist, creating a sturdy, robust cord designed to withstand incredible force. The whorl itself, often made of carved stone or faience, was not just a weight, it was the heart of the tool. Its size and heft determined the speed and momentum of the spin, allowing the artisan to control the character of the thread with remarkable precision. Every single thread that went into an Egyptian textile, from a priest's ritual robe to a pharaoh's burial shroud, began with this intimate manual process. How many millions of hours were spent in this rhythmic, meditative act, building an entire textile empire, one spinning rotation at a time? With a strong, fine thread finally spun, the next stage demanded a different kind of magic, one of intricate movement and geometric precision. The horizontal ground loom was the stage where threads became cloth. Picture a simple rectangular frame pegged directly into the earth. Two sturdy wooden beams, one at the far end and one close to the weaver, ran the entire width of the intended fabric. Between these beams, the long warp threads were stretched, pulled taut from the front beam to the back beam, lying perfectly parallel to each other like the strings of a giant, silent harp. These vertical threads formed the very foundation, the backbone of the entire textile. But how do you interlace a crosswise thread through hundreds of these tightly packed parallel lines without an impossibly slow and tedious process? The ancient Egyptian solution was brilliantly simple, a set of tools that automated the most complex part of the weave. They used what are called heddle rods. Imagine a series of thin sticks, each one lying horizontally across the warp threads. To every other warp thread, or in a specific pattern, a small loop of string was attached, and that loop was slipped over one of these heddle rods. So, one rod held, for example, all the even-numbered warp threads, and another rod held all the odd-numbered threads. This simple setup was the key to the entire operation. When the weaver lifted one heddle rod, it raised every single thread attached to it, creating a space, a tunnel called the shed, between the raised threads and the ones that remained stationary below. In one swift motion, the weaver could pass the weft thread, wound on a shuttle, through this wide open space from one side of the loom to the other. Then they would lower that heddle rod, lift the other one, and a new shed would open in the opposite alignment. The weft thread would be passed back through, this time weaving over and under the opposite set of warps. This repetitive lifting and passing over and under is what created the fundamental plain weave structure of most Egyptian linen. With each pass, the weaver would use a wooden sword-like tool to beat the new weft thread tightly against the previous rows, compacting the fabric and making it strong and dense. This was not a fast process, but it was an efficient and brilliantly engineered one. A single weaver sitting at this loom could produce vast sheets of cloth through this rhythmic, almost meditative dance of lifting, passing, and beating. Every tunic, every temple curtain, every royal burial shroud was born from this fundamental, repetitive action. The true marvel is that this simple technology, born thousands of years ago, is the direct mechanical ancestor of every automated loom that would follow. Can you hear the quiet, rhythmic sounds of the heddle rod tapping, the shuttle sliding, and the beat of the weft sword, the quiet music of creation from a civilization long gone? The rhythmic clatter of the heddle rod and the soft whisper of the shuttle were the heartbeat of the weaver's workshop. These were not solitary spaces, but vibrant, communal hubs of activity, often attached to the sprawling estates of nobles or the sacred precincts of temples. In these long, open-air shelters, protected from the sun by a simple roof of woven mats, the true social fabric of the craft came to life. At the top of this hierarchy stood the master weaver, a person whose skill was a treasure passed down through generations. Their experienced eyes judged the tension of every warp thread and the consistency of every beat of the weft, overseeing the production of the most complex and valuable textiles. Working alongside them were journeyman weavers, skilled artisans capable of producing vast quantities of fine cloth. And at the foundation of this entire operation were the apprentices, often young girls learning the craft from their mothers or aunts. Their small hands were tasked with the endless preparation, from winding spun thread onto bobbins to helping stretch the long warp threads across the loom. This was more than a job, it was an entire education, a deep immersion into a craft that sustained the community. The tools of their trade were simple yet perfectly adapted. Each weaver had her own set of personal items, a wooden shuttle polished smooth from constant use, a collection of heddle rods, and a weaving batten used to beat the threads into place. These items were so vital they were often buried with a weaver, tools for her craft in the afterlife. While we often imagine ancient workshops as silent, austere places, these spaces were likely filled with the low hum of conversation, stories shared, and songs sung to keep the rhythm of the work. The most fascinating aspect is that for much of Egypt's history, this essential, economically critical craft was dominated by women. From the spinning of the thread to the mastery of the loom, the creation of linen was in many periods a woman's domain. They were the keepers of the technical knowledge and the artistic tradition that clothed the living and wrapped the dead. This was not a hidden or marginalized task, but a respected and vital contribution to the household and the state. Their daily labor, a symphony of coordinated movement, transformed simple plant fibers into the very fabric of civilization itself. How different our understanding of ancient power becomes when we realize that one of its most fundamental pillars rested in the skilled hands of its women. These intricate patterns were far more than simple decoration. Every line, every symbol woven into the fabric was a deliberate act of encoding meaning, a layer of magic and protection integrated directly into the cloth itself. The most common motifs were a sacred language written in thread. Take the ankh, the iconic looped cross that symbolized life itself. When this symbol was woven into a tunic's border or a priest's sash, it was not merely a wish for long life. It was an active invocation, a continuous prayer for the wearer's vital force to be sustained and renewed. The very threads that formed the ankh were believed to channel the breath of life, creating a permanent, protective aura around the person. Then there was the djed pillar, a symbol of stability and the backbone of the god Osiris. Woven into the foundation of a textile, perhaps along the hem of a royal garment, it was a powerful statement of endurance. In a world where chaos was a constant threat, the djed pillar woven into cloth served as a magical anchor, a declaration that the wearer and the kingdom would stand firm and unshaken against any turmoil. And consider the lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth and the rising sun. A shroud intricately patterned with lotuses was not just a beautiful covering for the deceased. It was a map of the soul's journey, a promise woven in fiber that just as the lotus emerges pristine from the muddy waters each morning, the soul within would be reborn into a new and glorious existence. These symbols transformed ordinary linen into a sacred text. A simple tunic became a wearable shield, a temple curtain a barrier against impurity, and a burial shroud a guaranteed passage to the afterlife. The weaver was not just a craftsperson but a magician, her loom a tool for weaving spells of protection and power directly into the fabric of daily life. What other secrets might be hidden in the geometric patterns of a 5,000-year-old cloth, waiting for us to learn how to read them again? The pristine white linen we imagine flowing from every Egyptian loom tells only half the story. Walk through the bustling market of an ancient city, and your eyes would be met with a far more vibrant tapestry. While the purest white cloth was indeed reserved for the most sacred rituals, the Egyptian world was subtly painted with color. They possessed a sophisticated understanding of natural dyes, transforming their famous linen into a palette of earthy riches. For red, they turned to the root of the madder plant, which could produce a range of hues from a soft, dusty pink to a deep, rich rust. To achieve a brilliant yellow, they used safflower, a plant whose petals held the secret to a sunny, vibrant dye. And for the most prized and elusive color of all, blue, they relied on indigo, a dye so complex to produce and import that it instantly signaled immense wealth and high status. Wearing a garment of deep blue or a tunic with a red patterned border was a silent, powerful announcement. It declared that the wearer could afford not just the costly dyestuffs, but also the extra labor and time required for the dyeing process. This was a world where your social standing could be communicated through the very color of your clothes. A simple white tunic might mark a common laborer or a priest in a state of ritual purity, while a noblewoman's dress, dyed a soft safflower yellow and edged with madder red, spoke of her family's position and taste. Even the dead were sent into the afterlife wrapped in colored shrouds, ensuring their eternal garments reflected their earthly prestige. So the next time you picture ancient Egypt, let the monochrome image fade. In its place, see the subtle, elegant flashes of color woven into the fabric of their daily lives. What other assumptions about this civilization have been bleached white by the passage of time? This royal linen was a material of pure illusion, a fabric so fine it seemed to be woven from light itself. The Egyptians had a specific name for it, woven air, a term that perfectly captures its ethereal, almost weightless quality. To produce a single tunic from this cloth required an unimaginable level of skill and patience. The spinner had to draft a thread as fine as a single human hair, and the weaver had to maintain perfect tension on hundreds of these fragile warp threads. The resulting cloth was so sheer that when a pharaoh or queen wore it, the garment revealed the form beneath while simultaneously shimmering with a divine glow. It was a public demonstration of power through impossible craftsmanship, a statement that the ruler could command the very elements, but this delicate appearance was deceptive. Even at this incredible fineness, linen retained its legendary strength and durability. A royal gown of woven air could withstand the rigors of court life, its delicate threads holding strong through years of use. The beauty did not stop with the weave itself. Look closely at any statue of a pharaoh or a noble from the Old Kingdom. You will see their kilts and robes are not smooth, but intricately pleated with countless fine, precise ridges. This was not an artistic convention. It was a direct representation of a real textile technique. Achieving these pleats was a monumental task. Workers would carefully fold the dampened linen into hundreds of tiny, sharp creases, then press and dry them, sometimes using a form of starch or gum to set the folds permanently. The result was a garment that moved with a rustling, geometric elegance, catching the light in 1,000 different ways. The maintenance of a royal wardrobe was an industry in itself. A single pharaoh needed vast quantities of linen for every aspect of existence. There were daily garments, ceremonial robes, pleated kilts for official appearances, and elaborate sashes. The royal household, including all the queens, princes, and court officials, required a constant supply. Then there were the state gifts, where bolts of the finest linen were given to foreign dignitaries as a display of Egypt's unparalleled wealth and technical mastery. For a single said festival, the Jubilee celebrating a pharaoh's 30th year of rule, the records tell of thousands of meters of linen being commissioned for new costumes, temple offerings, and gifts to the people. The royal warehouses were not just storage rooms, they were the beating heart of a soft power empire, their shelves groaning with the material proof of Egypt's cultural supremacy. To wear this cloth was to wear the nation's identity, a second skin of power, piety, and prestige woven into every single thread. This same linen that clothed the living now faced its most sacred and demanding purpose, the journey into eternity. For funerary use, the cloth was not merely a wrapping, it was a consecrated vessel. The linen chosen for mummy wrappings possessed unique qualities, often being older, softer, and sometimes even recycled from a person's own beloved garments or temple hangings. This was not an act of frugality, but one of profound spiritual significance. A shroud made from the very sheets a person slept in during life, or from the curtains that adorned their local temple, was believed to be saturated with their personal essence and divine favor, making it a far more potent guide for the soul than a simple new bolt of cloth. The weaving process itself was a ritual. In some periods, the looms used for funerary textiles were considered sacred objects, and the weavers would undergo purification rites before beginning their work. The resulting fabric was often of an exceptionally fine, soft hand, designed not to chafe or constrain the transformed body within, but to embrace it in a gentle, protective cocoon. This careful preparation was rooted in a core belief that the quality and treatment of the linen directly impacted the deceased's chances in the afterlife. A poorly made, coarse shroud could hinder the soul, while one of ritually pure, high-quality linen smoothed the path through the treacherous underworld. This connection between material and spiritual success is vividly illustrated by the spells from the Book of the Dead. While these magical formulas are famous for being written on papyrus, there is compelling evidence that the powerful words themselves were sometimes woven directly into the fabric of the shrouds. Imagine a spell for preserving the heart or one for having power over one's enemies, being physically integrated into the very threads that bound the mummy. The linen became more than a passive container. It was an active, enchanted artifact, its fibers humming with protective magic that would activate around the deceased. Each layer of wrapping was therefore a layer of incantation, a physical prayer ensuring the soul would remember its name, pass the final judgment, and ultimately achieve eternal life. The weaver, in this context, was not just a craftsperson but a priestess of fate, her loom a final gateway between this world and the next. The ultimate proof of this ancient mastery was found not in a royal tomb, but in a crumpled bundle at the bottom of a simple First Dynasty grave. Known today as the Tarkan dress, this piece of linen is the oldest woven garment in the world, a staggering 5,000 years old. When it was first unearthed in a cemetery at Tarkan, archaeologists mistook it for a mere pile of rags. It was only decades later, during careful conservation, that its true form was revealed. It is a tailored V-neck shirt with carefully pleated sleeves and a narrow, fitted bodice. This was not a simple draped cloth or a primitive sack. This was a piece of sophisticated fashion, designed to fit the human form with an elegance that feels instantly modern. Its very existence shatters our assumptions about early clothing. This dress was not made for a pharaoh, but for a person of means living at the very dawn of the Egyptian state. Its precise cut and construction speak of a highly developed tailoring tradition, one that was already mature and refined. The skill required to create the fine pleating on the sleeves, to shape the neckline, and to sew the seams with such precision tells us that the weavers and seamstresses of the First Dynasty were not just producers of cloth, they were artists of the human form. This single garment pushes the history of high fashion back by centuries, proving that the desire for well-fitted, aesthetically pleasing clothing is as old as civilization itself. What other everyday innovations, now lost to time, were already ancient when the pyramids were still just an idea? That simple ground loom was a marvel of engineering, yet it had its limits. Its design was perfect for creating long, relatively narrow strips of cloth, but the relentless demand for textiles, coupled with ambitious new artistic visions, eventually pushed Egyptian weavers toward a new invention. The Great Leap Forward arrived with the vertical loom, a technology that likely appeared during the New Kingdom. Picture a tall, upright frame like a large, freestanding screen. This new orientation changed everything. The warp threads now hung down from a top beam, pulled straight by weights tied to their bottom ends. This vertical setup offered a much wider working area, allowing artisans to produce broader fabrics in a single piece, perfect for vast temple hangings or expansive bedsheets for the royal court. More importantly, it introduced a new physicality to the craft. The weaver now worked standing up, moving back and forth along the face of the loom. This allowed for a different kind of engagement with the cloth, making it easier to step back and assess a complex pattern taking shape. The true revolution, however, was in the shedding mechanism. While the ground loom used heddle rods that were lifted manually, the vertical loom could be equipped with a more sophisticated system of multiple heddles. This allowed the weaver to control several distinct sets of warp threads with greater speed and less physical strain. By using their feet to press on treadles connected to the heddles, they could free both hands to swiftly pass the shuttle back and forth. This was a fundamental shift toward automation. This new efficiency did not just mean faster production of simple cloth, it unlocked a new world of complexity. With greater control over individual warp threads, weavers could create intricate patterns like elaborate zigzags, detailed checkerboards, and even pictorial scenes directly into the fabric. The vertical loom turned textile production into a form of large-scale painting with thread. This technological evolution mirrored the expansion of the Egyptian empire itself, demanding more, creating more, and expressing its power on a grander, more intricate scale. How many other ancient innovations were born from the simple, relentless desire to make something not just functional, but breathtakingly beautiful? Weaving a single piece of cloth the size of a ship's sail was a feat of engineering as much as artistry. The sheer scale defies belief, a seamless expanse of linen wider than two people lying head to toe and longer than a royal barge. The secret to this impossible task was not a giant machine, but a simple principle mastered through human coordination, consistent tension. On the vast floor of a workshop, the outline of a giant ground loom would be pegged directly into the earth. Two massive beams running the entire intended width of the colossal textile were anchored solidly at each end. Between them, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of warp threads were stretched from the far beam to the near beam, creating a field of parallel lines that could be 30 feet wide. Keeping every one of these threads at the exact same tautness across such a distance was the monumental challenge. A single loose thread would result in a flaw, a weak ripple in the final fabric. The solution was a synchronized team of weavers, not one but several, working side by side along the width of the loom. They moved as one, a human machine. A lead weaver, often positioned at the center, would call the rhythm. On her signal, every weaver would lift their heddle rod in unison, creating a single, perfect shed that ran the entire width of the cloth. Then, not one shuttle, but several, would be passed from hand to hand down the line, each carrying the weft thread through the open tunnel. A second signal, and the heddle rods would shift, creating the counter shed for the return pass. After each pass, each weaver would use her weaving sword to beat the new weft thread firmly into place, ensuring the weave was uniform and dense across the entire breathtaking width. This was a ballet of motion and sound, the soft thud of the beaters hitting home in a staggered rhythm, the whisper of multiple shuttles sliding through the sheds. Their shared rhythm was the true loom, the invisible framework that held the entire operation together. Can you hear the synchronized breath of the weavers, the unspoken communication that turned individual effort into a single, flowing current of creation? This was how they clothed the gods and powered the ships that connected Egypt to the world. Egypt's linen was a currency of kings traded across the known world. This fabric flowed out from the Nile Valley in vast quantities, carried by merchant ships and diplomatic envoys to every major court in the Mediterranean and the Near East. It was not just a commodity, it was a tool of statecraft. The evidence for this vibrant trade is etched into ancient clay tablets, most famously the Amarna letters. This collection of diplomatic correspondence from the 14th century BCE reveals pharaohs and foreign rulers negotiating like merchants and allies. In one message, the king of Babylonia writes directly to the Egyptian pharaoh, complaining that the latest shipment of linen was not of the expected quality. He expected the finest woven air, not a common grade. In return for these precious textiles, Egypt received the treasures it lacked. From the Levant came vast logs of fragrant cedar wood, essential for building temples and sacred barks. From the African interior came ebony and elephant ivory. From the Aegean came silver and exotic oils. Each bolt of linen was a counterweight in a delicate economic balance, a soft, woven piece of Egypt exchanged for the hard riches of other lands. A single trade mission could see thousands of meters of cloth leave Egyptian warehouses, destined to become royal gifts in foreign palaces or sacred vestments in distant temples. This was a brilliant strategy. Egypt transformed its agricultural surplus, the flax from its fields and the skill of its weavers, into geopolitical influence and enduring wealth. The cloth that wrapped their dead also wrapped the entire ancient world in a web of economic dependency. Can you trace the threads of a single tunic woven on a Nile side loom as it becomes a king's ransom in a faraway land? The rhythmic clatter of the loom was not always the sound of forced labor. The social standing of the weaver is one of the most misunderstood aspects of this entire craft. For a long time, the popular image was of endless rows of slaves toiling under the whip to produce cloth for a faceless state. The reality, revealed by temple records, tomb paintings, and legal papyri, is far more complex and surprisingly modern. It is true that some weavers were indeed slaves or prisoners of war, their labor a resource exploited by the crown. Yet to paint every weaver with that same brush is to miss a profound truth about Egyptian society. For much of its history, weaving was the domain of highly respected, skilled professionals. These men and women were considered artisans, holders of a specialized knowledge essential to the kingdom's function and spiritual well-being. They were often organized into workshops attached to great temples or the estates of high nobles. In these settings, they were compensated with rations of grain, oil, and beer, and even plots of land to work for their own families. Some master weavers achieved such renown that they were buried with honors, their tombs inscribed with titles like Overseer of the Weavers, a mark of significant status. Legal documents from the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina show weavers engaging in business, buying and selling goods, and owning personal property. They were not anonymous cogs in a machine, but individuals with legal rights and economic agency. Their skill granted them a recognized and vital place in the societal structure. Think of them not as slaves, but as the ancient equivalent of specialized tech workers or master engineers, whose specific, irreplaceable knowledge gave them a form of power and security. The value of their craft elevated their standing. A society that clothed its gods and kings in linen would not leave the creation of that sacred material entirely in the hands of the despised. The weaver held threads of both tradition and power in her hands, and the culture, in its way, honored that. That mastery of the loom was not a skill one simply learned, it was a language you absorbed from infancy. The craft of weaving was a family inheritance passed from mother to daughter across countless generations. From the moment a child could sit upright, she was placed near the loom, surrounded by the rhythmic sounds and textures of the workshop. Her first toys were often scraps of linen and broken spindles. Her earliest memories would be the scent of flax and the sight of her mother's hands, a constant, mesmerizing dance of pulling, twisting, and threading. Long before she was given any real responsibility, she learned the rhythm of the work, the cadence of the heddle rods, and the quiet, focused energy required. This was an education through immersion, a slow and steady weaving of knowledge into the very fabric of a young person's identity. By the age of 5 or 6, her small hands were given simple, crucial tasks. She might be entrusted with winding the newly spun thread onto bobbins, a job that required patience and a gentle touch to avoid snapping the delicate strands. She learned to sort the hackled flax, feeling for the difference between the long, silky fibers for fine thread and the shorter tow for cordage. Every task, no matter how small, was a lesson in judging quality and understanding the material. There were no formal schools for this, no written manuals. The complex patterns, the secrets of achieving the perfect thread tension, the recipes for setting pleats, all of it was stored in living memory, demonstrated over and over until the movements became as natural as breathing. This generational chain was the true safeguard of Egyptian textile quality. A grandmother could look at a single thread and know if the retting process had been a day too long. A mother could hear the beat of the weft sword and know if the weave was tight enough for a royal commission. This intimate, unwritten transmission ensured that the techniques that produced the cloth of kings and gods remained consistent and flawless for over 3,000 years. The survival of the craft itself depended on the watchful eyes of children, learning not just how to weave but why it mattered. This silent knowledge of the loom was a form of living mathematics. Every weaver was an unwitting geometer, her craft governed by an intimate understanding of patterns, ratios, and spatial relationships essential to transforming chaos into order. The most fundamental mathematical challenge was maintaining a perfect grid, a consistent thread count across the entire length and width of the cloth. The thread count, the number of warp and weft threads packed into a single square unit, was the ultimate measure of quality. A high, even thread count meant a dense, strong, and smooth fabric, while a low or inconsistent one resulted in a weak, coarse cloth full of flaws. Achieving this consistency required the weaver to hold a complex set of numbers in her mind, counting the threads as she set up the warp, and then maintaining that count with every single pass of the shuttle. Her hands became her calculators, feeling the tension of each warp thread and judging the force of each beat of the weft sword to ensure the weave remained perfectly uniform. A deviation of just a few threads over a meter could throw off the entire piece, creating a visible weak spot or an unsightly bulge. This was geometry in its most practical form, the creation of a perfect, repeating plane from thousands of individual lines. But the mathematics grew far more complex with the introduction of patterns. To weave a simple zigzag or a checkerboard, the weaver had to plan the sequence of lifting the heddle rods in a precise, repeating order. This sequence is what we would now call an algorithm, a set of rules to be followed in calculations. For a diamond pattern, the algorithm became a symphony of counted lifts and passes, a rhythm that had to be internalized until it became as natural as a heartbeat. She was essentially programming the loom, her movements translating abstract geometric concepts into physical reality long before those concepts had formal names. The symmetry in a piece of striped linen, the proportional balance of a border, the fractal-like repetition of a complex motif, all of this was evidence of a deep, intuitive grasp of mathematical principles. The loom itself was her proving ground, a machine that demanded precision and rewarded it with beauty. How many of the geometric theorems later formalized by the Greeks were first discovered in the quiet, focused rhythm of the weaver's shed? Yet this mastery of linen only deepens a profound historical mystery. If the Egyptians were such brilliant textile producers, why did they almost completely ignore wool? In a world surrounded by cultures that prized sheep's wool, Egypt stood alone in its rejection. For the priestly class, wool was not merely a less desirable fiber, it was ritually impure, a substance that could defile a sacred space and disrupt a ceremony. This taboo was rooted in a fundamental distinction between the pure and the impure. Linen sprang from the earth, a gift from the divine Nile's fertile soil. It was a plant, a thing of light and cleanliness. Wool, however, came from an animal. It was seen as a product of the body, something that could carry the sweat and scent of the creature, and was potentially susceptible to lice and other pests. To a priest preparing to stand before a god, wearing animal fiber was akin to bringing a trace of chaos and mortality into a realm of perfect order and eternity. This belief was so strong that the Greek historian Herodotus, writing about Egypt centuries later, noted that no wool was ever allowed into a temple, and no priest would even be buried in a garment containing it. This was not a simple preference for a cooler fabric in a hot climate. It was a deep-seated religious doctrine that actively shaped their entire material world. Imagine the economic and cultural implications. While their neighbors bred vast flocks of sheep for their fleece, Egyptian herds were primarily kept for meat, milk, and temple sacrifices. Their textile industry, one of the most advanced in the ancient world, was built entirely around a single plant. This cultural choice funneled all of their innovation, all of their artistic energy, into perfecting the craft of linen. It created a mono-textile civilization, a society that found every answer it needed, from the clothes of a farmer to the shroud of a god-king, within the fibers of the humble flax plant. What does it say about a people that they wove their entire identity, both in life and death, from a single, sacred thread? The desert itself became the ultimate guardian of these fragile threads. Egypt's arid climate was a perfect natural preservation chamber. The relentless sun and the dry, scorching winds of the Sahara created an environment where the agents of decay simply could not thrive. In most parts of the world, organic materials like cloth, wood, and food are broken down by bacteria and fungi that require constant moisture to live. In the Egyptian desert, moisture was a rare and fleeting visitor. Any cloth left in the open air would have been bleached and torn by wind and sun, but when buried, it was placed in a sterile, desiccated environment. The moment a textile was sealed within a tomb, it was effectively freeze-dried by the heat and the parched air. The microbes that would normally feast on linen fibers were starved into dormancy, unable to carry out their destructive work. This was the first and most powerful layer of protection. The very soil of the burial grounds contributed to this miracle. The sand was rich with natural salts, minerals that actively pulled the remaining moisture out of any organic material they touched. As a body was laid to rest, these salts would draw the fluids from the tissues and the surrounding textiles, a process of natural desiccation that left the linen brittle but chemically stable. This salt-rich environment effectively cured the cloth like meat, removing the water that was essential for rot. Finally, the tombs themselves provided a final, crucial shield. Once the burial chamber was sealed, it was plunged into a profound and permanent darkness, safe from the fading power of ultraviolet light. It was also sealed from the humidity of the outside world and from the fluctuations of temperature that cause materials to expand, contract, and ultimately degrade. The tomb was a time capsule, a silent, dark, and stable vault where time itself seemed to stand still. A piece of linen placed inside was protected from every major threat: light, moisture, and biological life. This perfect storm of preservation is why we can still hold a 5,000-year-old dress in our hands today. The weavers created a masterpiece, but the desert provided the perfect cabinet in which to keep it. What other everyday treasures from their world have simply vanished from lands less blessed by geography? Modern science now reads the stories woven into these ancient fabrics, stories the human eye can no longer see. In laboratories around the world, researchers are using tools like digital microscopy to peer into the very heart of a thread. Under extreme magnification, the fibers reveal their history. A scientist can see the spiral structure of the flax fiber itself and even identify the subtle damage caused by the ancient retting process, confirming the techniques we have only guessed at until now. This microscopic view acts like a time machine, showing the exact skill of the spinner and the quality of the original plant, but the revelations go far deeper than the surface. Chemical analysis, a process called chromatography, can detect the faintest ghost of a dye. A piece of linen that appears pure white to us might still hold microscopic traces of madder root or indigo, proving it was once a vibrant color worn by a wealthy elite. These invisible chemical signatures are like forgotten whispers of the cloth's original hue, allowing us to repaint our mental image of the past with greater accuracy. Even more astonishing, isotopic analysis can now trace the geographic origin of the flax. By studying the unique chemical fingerprint locked within the fibers, researchers can determine if the plant was grown in the Nile Delta or perhaps hundreds of miles upriver. This means a single piece of cloth found in a pharaoh's tomb can tell us about trade networks and agricultural centers, revealing the economic web that supplied the royal court. These threads are no longer silent artifacts. They are active witnesses, and we are finally learning how to listen to their testimony. What other long-faded truths are waiting, hidden in plain sight, for the right tool to give them a voice once more? These ancient techniques are now being tested by modern hands. A small group of archaeologists and master weavers has taken on a remarkable challenge to recreate a piece of authentic Egyptian linen using only the tools and methods available 5,000 years ago. They began by planting a small field of flax, the same species the Egyptians used, and waited for the blue flowers to bloom. The first major hurdle came with the retting process. They filled a large tank with water and submerged their precious harvest, just as the ancient farmers would have done along the Nile. For days, they watched and waited, testing the stalks for that critical moment of readiness. The difference between success and failure was a matter of hours. One day too few and the fibers would not separate. One day too many and the entire crop would be a slimy, rotten loss. When they finally pulled the stalks from the water, the smell was exactly as the ancient texts described, a pungent, earthy odor signaling the plant's internal glue was breaking down. Drying the stalks was easy under the sun, but the next stage was a brutal physical shock. Using a replica of a wooden breaking tool, they began to smash the dry, brittle stalks. The sound was a series of sharp cracks, but the work was exhausting, jarring their arms and shoulders with every swing. Then came the scutching, beating the broken stalks to knock away the shattered wood, followed by the meticulous hackling, pulling the fibers through a bed of sharp iron nails to align them. After hours of this grueling labor, a small, soft pile of golden flax fibers was all they had to show for an entire field of plants. This was the moment of truth for the spinner. Sitting on the ground with a replica drop spindle, a simple weighted stick, she attempted to draft a thread. The first attempts were clumsy, the thread either too thick and lumpy or so thin it snapped instantly. It took weeks of practice to find the rhythm, the perfect balance between the pull of the hand and the twist of the spindle. The weaver faced her own monumental task at a replica ground loom pegged directly into the earth. Stretching the warp threads to a perfectly even tension was a lesson in frustration. A single gust of wind, a slight unevenness in the ground, and the entire setup would be flawed. The simple heddle rods, which seemed so straightforward in diagrams, required a deceptively complex coordination of hands and eyes. After months of effort, they produced a small, rough square of cloth. It was coarse, uneven, and full of mistakes, a humble testament to their dedication. Yet, holding this imperfect swatch was a moment of profound revelation. It was not the beauty of the cloth that stunned them, but the sheer, overwhelming skill embedded in every ancient textile they had ever studied in a museum. They had dedicated their modern lives to this craft and had barely managed a crude imitation. This hands-on struggle forged a new, deep humility. It transformed their understanding of those ancient artisans from abstract names into fellow craftspeople of breathtaking talent. How many lifetimes of embedded knowledge are contained within a single, seamless piece of ancient linen? Their linen pleats, sharp enough to cut the light, remain a riddle we have never truly solved. We can replicate the general shape, of course, by folding damp cloth and pressing it, but we cannot match the permanence. The pleats found on royal statues and in undisturbed tombs held their knife-edge crispness for a lifetime, and then for millennia more. Modern attempts, even with the strongest gums and resins, eventually soften and fall. The ancient method was a secret recipe, a precise alchemy of moisture, heat, and a mysterious setting agent that has been completely lost to time. Was it a specific plant sap, a mineral solution, or a technique of heating the cloth as it was folded? We simply do not know. The same frustrating mystery applies to their most legendary dyes. We have identified the sources, madder for red, safflower for yellow, but we cannot reproduce the legendary shades described in texts, colors said to be as deep as wine or as bright as the sun at its peak. Their process likely involved a closely guarded sequence of steps, specific mordants to fix the color, and fermentation times that turn the dye vat into a living, breathing entity. A single skipped step and the magic was lost. Perhaps the greatest enigma of all is their thread. How did spinners, working without any form of magnification, consistently produce filaments as fine as a single human hair? The human eye struggles to even focus on something that slender. It suggests a level of tactile sensitivity we can scarcely comprehend, a feel for the fiber so refined that their fingertips could perceive the separation of individual flax filaments. This was not just skill, it was a heightened sensory perception honed from childhood. These artisans achieved a level of perfection with simple tools that our advanced technology still cannot fully explain. Their secrets died with them, leaving behind only the flawless evidence of their work and a haunting question: how much profound knowledge has vanished without a trace? The legacy of those ancient looms is woven directly into the fabric of your world. When you run your hand over a crisp linen tablecloth or slip into a fresh linen shirt on a summer day, you are feeling the direct descendant of Egyptian ingenuity. Their meticulous cultivation of flax, perfected over 3,000 years, established the very blueprint for the global linen industry we know today. The trade routes they pioneered, carrying their precious cloth to every corner of the ancient Mediterranean, planted the seeds for its spread across Europe. The knowledge of how to grow, ret, and spin flax traveled with the cloth, eventually taking root in places like Flanders and Ireland, which would become legendary linen centers in their own right. But their influence is far more than just agricultural. Look at the statues of Greek gods and Roman senators, their forms draped in flowing white robes. This was not a coincidence. The classical world looked to Egypt as the pinnacle of ancient wisdom and sophistication, and they adopted the Egyptian aesthetic of clean, white, draped clothing as the ultimate symbol of civilization, philosophy, and power. This ideal was immortalized in marble and passed down through the centuries, shaping our entire modern perception of classical elegance. That iconic image of a pristine white toga is in essence an Egyptian fashion statement filtered through a Roman lens. This visual legacy continues to echo on runways and in home decor today, where linen is prized for its natural, relaxed, and timeless beauty, qualities first recognized and perfected on the banks of the Nile. So the next time you appreciate the cool, breathable comfort of linen, remember you are experiencing a 5,000-year-old sensation, a gift from the weavers of ancient Egypt that has never gone out of style. A single thread of flax connects the farmer's field to the pharaoh's tomb, binding together the entire world of ancient Egypt. We have unraveled secrets woven into the very soul of their civilization, from the sacred spells encoded in a shroud's pattern to the breathtaking skill required to spin a thread as fine as air. This was far more than a textile. It was a language of purity and power, a currency of kings, and a sacred map for the afterlife. The geometric precision of their looms, the generational knowledge passed from mother to daughter, the sheer physical endurance required to create a single tunic, all of it reveals a society of profound depth and sophistication. A simple piece of cloth is not just an artifact, it is a window. Through its weave, we see their beliefs, their economy, their art, and their unshakable connection to the divine. Every pleat, every symbol, every color tells a story of human ingenuity that echoes across 5,000 years. So tell me, which of these secrets left you the most amazed? Was it the hidden mathematics of the loom, the sacred rejection of wool, or the permanent mystery of those impossible pleats? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to continue exploring the hidden wonders of the ancient world, be sure to subscribe for our next deep dive into the past.